Hi, I'm Lia.
And I'm AK.
And we bought our first investment property at the start of the pandemic. And since then, we have built a property portfolio which turns over 6 figures a year.
A lot of people who come to us for mentorship often say the same thing. I want to get into property, but I've heard that now is just not a good time.
Well, today we're going to discuss why we think now is a great time to get into property.
Number one, most people are fearful, and that is totally understandable. We were completely fearful when we first started. And just to make it clear, fear is actually a good thing because it keeps us safe. From an evolutionary perspective, fear is what kept us safe from the saber-toothed tigers and things that were trying to eat us. But in the modern day world, we're not going to get eaten by those creatures anymore. So we need to understand how we can hack that fear system in order for us to progress forwards. And something we learned when we first started in property was not to blindly listen to the media out there. There is a quote from Warren Buffett that says, "Be fearful when others are greedy and be greedy when others are fearful." The facts are that right now, most people are sitting back and they are waiting. And that to me is a huge signal as to why you should be getting into property right now.
Number 2, property is, well, it's as safe as houses, really.
That was my joke.
Yeah, it was your joke. Property is slow and it's boring. And that is why a lot of people look for more attractive, quicker ways to make money. Anything like crypto or trading. Property is not quick. It's slow, it's boring, but it's reliable. And it's been a proven asset class for decade after decade after decade. After all, the UK isn't building any more land. We're a tiny little island. This country simply cannot build enough houses for the demand that's out there. According to one estimate commissioned by the NHF, known as the National Housing Federation, around 340,000 new homes are needed to be supplied in England each year, of which 145,000 of them should be affordable housing. The reality is that in 2021 to 2022, the new housing supply was around 233,000 new homes. There's a big deficit here, which again gives us an indication of the ongoing strength of the demand. People are never going to not want housing. People need somewhere to live.
Number 3, we need more income streams. Leah says to me a lot of the time, how long will it be before a cup of coffee is £10?
It's ridiculous. Paid £5 in the airport for a coffee.
And while she says that in jest, it's actually not really a joke. So many people that we talk to are feeling the pressure of the cost of living crisis. And until wages catch up for all households, I think it's only going to get harder. Real wages compared to the price of goods are not expected to return to the 2021 levels until 2027. So for us, this is a huge reason why you should be considering getting into property in 2023. And this doesn't necessarily mean investing in property before you sit there and say, I don't have any money to invest in property. You can be looking at other creative ways, such as finding and packaging deals, controlling properties, subletting properties. They're just some of the examples that you can get involved in property.
Yeah, so like you say, it's not just about owning houses. There's other ways you can be getting involved in property to make an extra income.
So many strategies, and we'll cover those shortly.
Number 4, most of the wealthy are doing it. Let's talk about generational wealth and why for years and years and years the wealthy people have been investing in property and what they know.
One of the things I've done this year is actually turn off all notifications on any news apps. I've actually deleted some of the news apps as well on my phone because a lot of the time the news outlets are pushing this agenda of property is bad, property is crashing, property is terrible. But if you actually look at what the huge institutions are doing, one of the richest banks in the UK, Lloyds Bank, are going to become one of the biggest, if not the biggest, private landlord in the UK, as it aims to buy 50,000 homes in the next decade. If this isn't a big enough indication to get into property, then I genuinely am not sure what is.
Number 5, property pays you 3 times, and let us explain why. Theoretically, if you buy at the right price, you can technically lock in equity as you buy it. So that's where the saying, you make money when you buy, comes from. Let's say a house is worth £200,000 and you buy it under market value for 180,000, then technically you've already got 20,000 of equity locked into that property. So right now, that is actually not that ridiculous. We're seeing more and more properties on the market reduce in price, and more vendors out there are more open to negotiations due to the slowing demand.
And actually, I just want to raise another point that for property, you only need 25% as a deposit to purchase that asset that can produce you an income. Imagine that. Like imagine going to any other asset class and going, I want to buy that gold bar or I want to buy that stock, but I only want to give you 25% deposit and can you just lend me the rest of the money? It's insane.
So that's the first way you get paid. The second way you get paid is from the rent. So when you eventually rent the property out, it hopefully then produces a positive cash flow for you. Assuming that you've done all the numbers, the deal works, then you should be making a profit. We've shown you in other videos how to analyse deals for buy-to-let, how to analyse them for HMO, houses of multiple occupancy. And if you missed those videos, you can check them out in the cards above.
And then the third way that you can potentially get paid is, of course, having the capital appreciation on the house. So house prices on average, depending on the area, double in value every 10 years. And a lot of people say, oh, well, what about house prices dropping? And oh, what if there's a crash? Well, it doesn't really matter if the house prices drop slightly if you are renting the property long term, as long as it is cash flowing positively.
And if you ask anyone who's bought a house ever, they never regret buying it. When you say, do you regret buying that house 20 years ago or 30 years ago, 40 years ago, they're always so happy that they locked it in at the price of the time.
I know. I always say to Leah, like, imagine if we knew what we knew now, like 20 years ago.
That is what he says when we're constantly driving around. He's like, imagine knowing what we know, but living in London.
I know, I'm like, imagine knowing what we did 10 years ago.
I know, if only. On to the next point.
Point number 6, passive income.
This buzzword is thrown around everywhere. So let's define it. What actually is passive income? Well, it refers to income generated without you having to clock in and out, so to speak. It's income that you earn with minimal effort, relatively minimal effort.
Yeah, so like when I was working in a corporate job, I would have to go in at a specific time, I could leave at a specific time, and I was on a salary. So therefore, it's not very passive because I have to actively go there at those times and do certain work in order to get paid.
So that's what they call active income. This is salary from a job, hourly wage for a non-salary job. Passive income often goes hand in hand with property because the rent you receive is then described as passive because you haven't had to work for it every month.
Yeah, and I think with passive and active, there is a scale to this. When we talk specifically about property strategies, you might have one end of the scale, which is a lot more passive, and that would be strategies such as commercial property, for example. So if you are signing a long-term business lease, maybe say 10 years with a business, and you are the landlord or the owner of that property, you're not having to do a lot for that income because you're essentially letting that property on a long-term lease. That company deals with pretty much everything. However, on the other end of the scale, towards the more active end, you have strategies such as rent to rent or serviced accommodation, which require you to be on the ground a lot more, to advertise the rooms, to find the deals,
They're very hands-on.
They're a lot more hands-on. So there is a bit of a scale. However, property can be very passive, and that is another great reason why you should be getting into property.
Point number 7 is tax. Everyone's favourite subject. Why do people love talking about tax?
Loves tax. They just love tax. Just a small caveat. We are not financial advisors, so make sure that you do speak with a tax professional. But here are just some ways and some examples of how property is just super tax efficient.
Lots of people ask us and ask AK on mentoring calls if they should be buying properties in their personal name or in a company name. Firstly, let's consider owning a property in your personal name if you're a higher taxpayer. With a personally owned property, you pay income tax on the rental income. So here's an example. If you've got a buy-to-let that you're currently letting out for £950 a month and the mortgage is £600 per month, then you'll make £4,200 of profit per year, assuming no huge expenses, before tax. Then you'll have to pay £3,120 a year in income tax, leaving you with just £1,080 of actual income after all your taxes are paid. So now let's consider that same deal, but through a property investment company, a limited company. So when you buy it through a company, you'll still pay tax on your profits. You pay corporation tax at 19% on the profits and not 40% if it was in your personal name. So you're still making the same amount of gross profit, but with the limited company, you'll be paying £798 of corporation tax, leaving you with £3,402 of profit after tax. I'll add a little caveat in here, and that is that if you're already a limited company and you're already making over £50,000 a year in profit, then the corporation tax as of April of this year, 2023, did go up to 25% and not 19%. But that is unlikely if you've just started your limited company, you've just started buying properties, and perhaps you've only got 1 or 2 properties in that limited company. It's unlikely you'll be turning over 50,000 in profit per year. So that is why I did give the 19% example.
It's going to take you some time to get to a profit of £50,000, quite likely, and also it's still 15% cheaper than what it would be if you were to be taxed on your personal name as well, if you were a higher rate taxpayer.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that leads quite nicely onto the next point about tax deductible expenses. So let's talk about expenses.
Yeah, exactly. So make the most out of allowable expenses that can be offset essentially against property income tax.
So these can include property maintenance, cost of repairs, replacing furniture, including, beds, televisions, white goods,
cleaners, gardens, agency fees, vehicle mileage,
driving to your investment area.
Exactly. Insurance costs, and these are just some of them. All of these can help reduce your tax liability. And one of the first books we read, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, when we first started, and the motto there is simple, straightforward, and to the point. Pay yourself first before spending a penny anywhere else. And I finally started to understand what that means now. And then the third point when we talk about tax here is you are able to save quicker for your next investment by keeping the profit in your company. So imagine you want to purchase another buy-to-let, for example, and you need £25,000 deposit to do so. If you bought the property personally, if we were talking about that first example, it would take you a long time to get there based on those savings. Because remember, it was just over £1,000 you were saving a year versus that £3,000 a year.
Imagine that you're keeping your company profits inside your company, not putting them into your personal name. You're going to be able to save your next 25% deposit quicker if you keep your money in the limited company rather than if you were having your property pay you into your personal name because you bought it that way, because essentially you're getting taxed more in your personal name than you are in a limited company. So that final point there is just that you're going to get closer to buying your next investment property sooner.
There are just a few benefits as to why property is very tax efficient.
If you know what you're doing.
If you know what you're doing. And the final point number 8, is the diversity of strategies. And we touched on this earlier on. Most people think property investing is just going out and buying a house, right? But there are so many ways to get involved in property. And here are just some strategies to name a few.
Buy-to-let,
HMO,
flips,
social housing, lease options,
deal sourcing,
title splits.
You've got commercial properties, rent to rent,
serviced accommodation, commercial to residential,
just Airbnb strategy,
land banking,
and developments.
Land development. So these are just some of the ways. And I think here I just want to stress that all of this takes time. It's a long-term process. And a lot of people say, I'm not going to get into property. I'm going to wait till next year. I'm going to wait till the news tells me otherwise. And actually, what a lot of people fail to understand is you need to start now, because all of this just takes so much time. And it's almost like you can't complete property because there's so many different variations and strategies to learn, to get to grips with. Yeah, really, I can't emphasize that point enough, is that we think that now is the best time to get involved in property.
Sometimes what comes back into my mind is when we bought our first property at the start really of the pandemic, and everybody told us we were crazy, we were stupid, what are we doing, we're going to lose all our money. Obviously that's not the same story now because we're now quite a few years in, but it just goes to show that if you don't take action, you're just going to live with the regret of never doing anything.
And someone just said to me, and it's always stuck with me, the best time is always now.
Or yesterday.
If you're interested in kickstarting your property journey and would like help with that, then click on the mentoring link below in the description box and I will personally get back to you.
Thank you so much for watching this video. If you did enjoy it, you might also enjoy some of our other videos about the time we got squatters in our property or how much some of our investment properties make. We'll see you next week. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.